The influence of Jack Paar can still be felt in the entertainment world today. His unique style and willingness to take risks have inspired a new generation of comedians, from Johnny Carson to Jimmy Fallon. But behind the charm was a secret most audiences never knew. Jack Paar wore a toupee every single night. And he wasn't just alone. By the 1950s, Hollywood had become a hidden world of hairpieces, cover-ups, and carefully protected illusions. And in this video, we're going to reveal 7 secretly bald guests Jack Paar welcomed onto his show while hiding the same secret himself. From iconic actors to famous entertainers, these guests will simply shock you. Let's begin this list with number 7, Humphrey Bogart. There is perhaps no one more synonymous with vintage Hollywood than iconic actor Humphrey. Now, he was a man audiences believed in almost instantly. The trench coat, the cigarette, the tired eyes, and the clipped voice that sounded like it had already heard every lie on earth. Bogart didn't feel polished in the usual movie star way. He felt worn out and unbothered. Whether he was standing in a smoky nightclub in Casablanca, drifting downriver in The African Queen, or playing one of those hard-boiled detectives who always seemed smarter than the room, he carried himself like someone who had no interest in pretending, which makes this secret land a little harder. For all the toughness he projected on screen, Bogart was quietly depending on the same kind of illusion so many men in Hollywood were desperate to protect. During the biggest years of his career, he reportedly wore a toupee, and his hairpieces were believed to have been made through Max Factor's famous Hollywood salon. That place wasn't just a beauty stop for actresses, it was practically a secret repair shop for male stardom. Wigs, cosmetics, and facial touch-ups, all of it was carefully designed to keep the fantasy alive under those brutal studio lights. And Bogart, of all people, kept that fantasy sealed tight. Unlike a few others from that era, he never joked about it, never admitted it, never turned it into one of those self-aware Hollywood stories. He just wore it, walked onto set, and gave performances so grounded and masculine that nobody thought to question what was happening on top of his head. That silence says a lot. Bogart understood exactly what his image meant, and he had built an entire legacy around looking like the one man in the room who didn't care what anybody thought. But of course he did. And honestly, that doesn't make him less interesting. It makes him more human. Off-screen, Bogart was more layered than the myth ever let on. He served in the Navy, pushed back during the Blacklist era, stood up for Lena Horne when neighbors tried to force her out, and by many accounts, wasn't nearly as hard as the public version of Bogey suggested. That's what makes the wig feel almost fitting. Even one of the toughest faces in movie history was still protecting a private insecurity the camera was never supposed to catch. And somehow, he got away with it. Number 6, Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy was a wonderful actor. He won the hearts of audiences everywhere with his aw shucks charm, which made him one of the most famous Hollywood actors of all time. But as they say, no image in Hollywood stays untouched forever. On screen, Jimmy Stewart looked like the last truly honest man in show business. He had that nervous voice, that lanky frame, and that quiet sincerity people trusted instantly. Whether he was stumbling through It's a Wonderful Life, peering through a window in Rear Window, or spiraling through Obsession in Vertigo, he never felt like a polished star. He felt real. That was his power. And maybe that's why this secret lasted so long. Behind that familiar all-American image was something people were never supposed to notice. By the mid-1940s, Stewart had reportedly begun wearing toupees, and once you know it, the timeline becomes hard to ignore. Through his Hitchcock years, his westerns, and much of the second half of his career, the hair people saw on screen likely wasn't his own. And this wasn't some cheap backstage fix either. Stewart's hairpieces were believed to be made through Max Factor's legendary Hollywood operation, where wigs were treated almost like sacred studio equipment. These pieces were built strand by strand, using real human hair, carefully tied into fine lace, so the scalp looked natural under brutal studio lighting. That's what makes it fascinating. Jimmy built his entire screen identity around honesty, but even he was quietly playing the same Hollywood game as everyone else. And the irony runs deeper than that. Stewart wasn't just a movie star. He was a decorated World War II bomber pilot, a man deeply admired for his patriotism, discipline, and decency. To millions of people, he represented something clean and dependable in a town built on illusion, which makes the Wigs' secret feel strangely perfect. Even Hollywood's most trustworthy face was still, in one very personal way, performing. He wore it well, though. We mean so well, in fact, that most people never questioned it for decades. Number 5. Fred Astaire. If there's one person who seemed too graceful to belong to ordinary life, it was Fred. He did not simply dance in movies. He floated through them. Everything about him looked impossibly light. Audiences watched his feet, his rhythm, and his elegance. Very few were paying attention to his hairline. That probably helped. Because behind that immaculate screen image, Fred Astaire was reportedly dealing with the same quiet Hollywood problems so many leading men tried to hide. By the time he became a film legend, it is doubtful he had much natural hair left to work with. The recession around his hairline could sometimes be spotted at the edges, where the toupee met the skin a little too sharply for anyone looking close enough. But almost nobody was studying Fred that way. They were too busy watching him do things no one else on Earth could do. And that is what makes his case different from everyone else on this list. A normal hairpiece only had to survive close-ups, bright lights, and long shooting days. Fred had to survive motion, real motion, spins, jumps, fast turns, full dance routines, hours of rehearsal, retakes, sweat, momentum. One wrong move and the illusion could have come loose right there in the middle of a number that cost the studio a fortune. His wig makers were not just covering baldness, and they were solving a technical problem nobody else in Hollywood had in quite the same way. The piece had to stay secure without looking stiff, and it had to move with him without giving itself away. Just imagine the pressure of that. You are Fred Astaire. You are trying to deliver one of the most famous dance performances ever put on film, and somewhere in the back of your mind, there has to be that small private fear. Stay on. What is strangely moving about Astaire is that off-screen, he was known for being shy, courteous, and far less interested in celebrity than people expected. He did not seem in love with the spotlight. He seemed devoted to the work. Maybe that is why this secret feels less vain than vulnerable. So, what do you think about him? Number 4. Sean Connery. Well, long before he was James Bond, he was Thomas Sean Connery. And he was known for his paradoxical mixture of rough-and-tumble Scotsman combined with graceful self-possession, which, in truth, was exactly what made him unforgettable. He could walk into a room looking like he had just stepped off a dockyard shift and still carry himself like royalty. That combination became his signature. Women were drawn to him, men copied him, and once he became Bond, the image was sealed in stone. He was cool without begging for it, dangerous without raising his voice, effortless, at least on the surface. That is what makes the hair secret so perfect. By the time Connery became the face of 007 in Dr. No in 1962, he had already been losing his hair for years. He started going bald young, long before the tuxedos, martinis, and Aston Martins entered the picture. So the man audiences accepted as the sleekest spy in cinema history was stepping onto those sets with a custom-fitted toupee. Not once, not occasionally, but throughout his Bond years. The producers simply could not imagine the fantasy working any other way. Bond had to be immaculate. Bond had to look untouchable. And in that era, a bald Bond was apparently asking too much of the illusion. What makes Connery different from a few of the others on this list is that he eventually stopped hiding from the truth. Off-screen, he was often comfortable being seen bald, and later in life, He even mocked the ridiculous lengths men went to in order to disguise hair loss. That gave the whole thing a strange honesty. He wore the piece because the role demanded it, not because he wanted to spend his life pretending. Still, and the funniest part is that the films occasionally betrayed the secret. In a few water scenes, especially when Bond ends up swimming, the polished image slips for a second, and the real Connery peeks through. Fans noticed. Well, they always do. And once people started spotting it, the mystery became its own little side game. Maybe that is why this one feels less sad and more fascinating. Sean Connery sold the world one of the most masculine screen personas ever created, yet even he had to submit to the same old Hollywood vanity machine. James Bond could survive bullets, sharks, and international assassins. But apparently, he still needed a wig. Number 3. Frank Sinatra. Frank cared deeply about how he looked. Not in a shallow way exactly, but in the way a man like Sinatra had to. His whole presence depended on control, and the suit had to sit right. The tie had to fall right. The face had to hold. And when his hair started thinning around 1950, right as his career was going through one of its roughest stretches, that control started slipping in a place he couldn't ignore. So he handled it the Frank way. He didn't just buy a toupee and move on. He turned the whole thing into a private operation. Sinatra hired a woman named Helen Turpin to travel with him and manage his hairpieces full-time. She followed him everywhere, carrying dozens of them in a small bag. Movie sets, concerts, clubs, recording sessions, wherever Sinatra went, the hair went too. And honestly, that detail says more about him than almost anything else. This wasn't just vanity. It was anxiety dressed in elegance. Sinatra was a perfectionist, and hair loss hit him at a time when everything else in his life already felt unstable. His voice career had dipped, the pressure was mounting, and he was still expected to walk into every room looking like Frank Sinatra. For a while, the illusion held beautifully. His early hairpieces were said to be excellent. Later on, not so much. The quality dropped, and people started noticing. That's the sad little irony in it. The man who controlled everything so carefully still couldn't fully stop time from showing up. He just found a way to carry it with him in a bag. Number 2. Gene Kelly. When you think of Gene Kelly, you don't picture fragility. You picture force. He wasn't delicate like Fred Astaire. He hit the screen like a man who could outdance gravity and then shove it aside for being in the way. Everything about him felt physical, and strong legs, sharp movement, broad shoulders, and that easy confidence that made even the hardest choreography look like pure instinct. That's what makes this detail so strange. Behind all that athletic confidence was a quiet problem the studio took seriously enough to put in writing. Gene Kelly began losing his hair fairly young, and MGM reportedly didn't leave that to chance. According to later reports, his contract actually guaranteed him a steady supply of custom-made hairpieces for productions. Well, not a favor. Not a wink and nod backstage arrangement. A legal clause. And that says a lot about how Hollywood worked. The image had to be protected, especially when the man on screen was supposed to represent energy, masculinity, and physical perfection. Kelly wasn't just dancing in musicals, and he was carrying an entire type of male star the studio wanted preserved at all costs. And apparently, that included his hairline. What's almost funny is how formal the whole thing sounds now. Somewhere in the machinery of old MGM, there were people whose job included making sure Gene had the right hair on the right day. And yet, outside that carefully managed world, there are photos of him without it. Older, balder, and more human. Honestly, it doesn't make him smaller. It makes the whole illusion feel more revealing. Even the guy dancing through puddles needed contractual help keeping the fantasy alive. Okay, now let's end this with number 1, John Wayne. There are certain men in old Hollywood who stopped feeling like actors and started feeling like monuments. John was one of them. He wasn't just a movie star. He was the cowboy. the face of the American West. The guy who walked into a scene and somehow made every other man in the frame look less solid. That's why the truth about his hair feels almost ridiculous. Wayne began losing his hair young, and by the late 1940s, he had already started relying on toupees in film after film. From that point on, the Duke people thought they knew was being finished in the same way a movie set was, carefully, deliberately, and with more backstage work than the audience was ever meant to imagine. And the strange thing is, he didn't seem especially ashamed of it. When somebody once tried to embarrass him over his fake hair, he answered with one of the most John responses possible. He said it wasn't fake hair. It was real hair. It just wasn't his. That line alone tells you everything about him. Still, there was one problem. A toupee can survive a close-up. It can survive a horse ride. What doesn't always survive is a punch. During the Fighting Kentuckian in 1949, Wayne's hairpiece was reportedly knocked off during a fight scene, and somehow nobody caught it before the movie was released. The same thing happened again in North to Alaska. Imagine being one of the toughest men in movie history and getting betrayed by your scalp in the middle of a fist fight. It's almost too perfect. And then there was Maureen O'Hara, who deserves a medal for what she said on the set of The Quiet Man. After Wayne and John Ford kept complaining about her hair blowing into her face during outdoor scenes, she finally fired back and basically reminded the whole set that John Wayne was in no position to lecture anybody about hair. Now that one probably landed harder than any punch ever did. And yet, for all the cover-up and maintenance, Wayne did show his real balding head once on purpose in The Wings of Eagles, which, strangely, makes him more unique. Well, that's all from us. If you enjoyed this video, like it and subscribe. We'll catch you in the next one.